Thanks, everyone. We, my name is Sheena Lona Alexander, and I'm the Smart Justice Organizer at ACLU Hawaii. Just a reminder, this webinar is being recorded, and to type your questions in the Q&A chat to be answered at the end of the presentation. Before we begin, can folks see me? I know that, Mateo, you're sharing your screen. Cool, okay. So before we begin, it's important to acknowledge, it's important to not acknowledge what's happening around us. There are protests and demonstrations here in Hawaii and through the states in response to yet another Black life being taken by police officers who are supposed to serve and protect us. The death of George Floyd has awakened the public consciousness about the stark differences and realities of Black lives in America, and that police brutality has to stop. At ACLU Hawaii, we've taken on many cases against the excessive use of force by police officers in our community, and yet even more needs to be done. It's important to take a moment and reflect on the Black lives that have been lost. George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, who would turn 27 today, Tony McDade, a Black trans man killed by Tallahassee police, and the list continues. Let's please take a moment of silence and reflect on how we came to this moment, but also to prepare ourselves to roll up our sleeves because there's so much work to do. Thank you. So I'm going to hand it over to Mateo Cabral, our legal director at ACLU Hawaii. Thank you, Mateo.
Thank you, Shayna. So before we get started, I just wanted to quickly go over who we are, what is the ACLU of Hawaii? And we are a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization. And our mission is to uphold and defend the civil rights and civil liberties of everyone in Hawaii, those granted under the US Constitution, Hawaii Constitution, and also state and federal laws. We have been in Hawaii since 1965. And as a watchdog group, we try to maintain complete independence from the government, which means we do not seek or accept government funding. So before going into the substantive portion of the presentation, I want to talk about a few disclaimers. The first thing is much of the information provided here you can find in your constitution, Pocket Constitution, or at aclu.org. If you personally have a legal situation or if you have a very specific legal question, you should go to our website, acluhi.org/need legal help with, you can see it on your screen, and submit an intake. We review and respond to every intake we receive. And if you have a question here, perhaps you could do it in a hypothetical way, and I'll do my best at the end to answer it. This presentation is not meant to be legal advice. I'm giving you legal information and a way to know your rights so that you can defend your rights. And finally, a couple of final thoughts. One of them is that you need to assess your own risk. When you attend a protest, you do have the fundamental right to demonstrate and protest in the United States, but you have to check things and know your risks. For example, if you have, if you're undocumented or if your immigration status is uncertain, you might want to think about taking some precautions, particularly, knowing your rights, knowing how to interact with the police officers, knowing how to interact with ICE before you join a protest or a demonstration. Also, keep in mind that there is a pandemic going on. And so, one of the things that, that means there are limitations on public gatherings, there are limitations and rules around social distancing and wearing masks. And so we ask you to keep that in mind as you protest and demonstrate, and to the extent possible, keep social distance and wear a mask. You don't want to give the police officers an excuse to come in and claim that this poses some sort of safety, public health risk. So with those disclaimers out of the way, these are the things we're going to cover. I'm going to cover the right to protest, the right to record law enforcement, what to do if you're arrested or stopped, and also, how can you respond if you believe your rights have been violated. And as I say, it's important that you know your rights, not just because you protect yourself, but because truly the only way these rights have meaning, the only way we can hold government accountable is if you know your rights and you exercise them. So with that said, and before going into the substance, I want to play a video from one of my colleagues at the national office, which will cover some of the things I will talk about here today in a little bit more detail.
Here we are again, people have taken to the streets to show their pain, show their outrage, and demand justice. The ACLU, we've been doing it for 100 years, trying to protect that right to protest, that right to call people empowered to account. And as you come out to protest, there's a couple of things to keep in mind. Number one, the right to protest is a fundamental human right guaranteed by the U.S. Constitution and the First Amendment. Number two, if you get stopped, ask if you're free to go. If they say yes, calmly walk away. You have the right to record. The right to protest includes the right to record. It includes the right to even record police doing their jobs. The police can order people to stop interfering with legitimate police operations, but video recording from a safe distance is not interfering. If you get stopped, they don't have the right to take or confiscate any videos or photos without a warrant. If you are videotaping, keep in mind that in some states the audio is treated differently than the images, but images and video images are always fully protected by the First Amendment. Know also that the police's main job in a protest is to protect your right to protest and to de-escalate any threat to violence. If you get arrested, don't say anything. Ask for a lawyer immediately. Don't sign anything and don't say anything. Don't agree to anything without an attorney there. Demand your right to a local phone call. If you call a lawyer, they're not allowed to listen. If you call anybody else, they are likely to listen. Finally, they cannot delete data from your device under any circumstances. Know your rights, know the risks. Even with the legal protections I just discussed, we all know that the protesting has real risks, especially for Black people, especially for people of color. Arrest has different consequences for people who are undocumented. And we're in the midst of a global pandemic. So you have to take into account your own health and the health of others. Go out, speak up, and stay safe. Peace and love.
One second while I get back on the presentation. Sorry. I think I accidentally clicked. Okay, back on. So I will first talk, as Emerson just did, on the basics of the right to protest. And the first question many people have is, where can I protest? And where are my First Amendment rights most protected? And that's in what courts call public forums, but essentially those are just public spaces. Places like parks, streets, sidewalks, plazas, or in front of government buildings. But generally, you do not have the right to protest in private property. So for example, here in Hawaii, you wouldn't just be able to go to Ala Moana Mall or any of the malls and just protest. You will need permission from the owners or the administrators of the mall. The second thing that I want you to keep in mind is that the government cannot target speech because of its viewpoint. That's kind of the most fundamental First Amendment right. And this means, police and the government have to treat protest and counter-protest alike, regardless of the messaging. So if the government has allowed protests in the past with one viewpoint, they have to allow protests in the future for that same viewpoint or even a totally different viewpoint. And it cannot just treat protests differently because of the content or the viewpoint of the demonstration. Finally, one of the things you have to keep in mind is that even though you have a fundamental right to speak out, you have a fundamental right to demonstrate and protest, that doesn't necessarily give you the license to break the law. And so what that means is that, for example, you cannot obstruct car or pedestrian traffic while you are demonstrating. You can go to the streets, you can go to the sidewalks, but you have to allow for traffic to go through. And in some places, the government can require you to have a permit before you protest. Generally not when you're doing it in public sidewalks, on the streets, or here in Hawaii near the Capitol. But otherwise, in other public spaces like parks, they might require you to have a permit in advance. That being said, in situations where things are rapidly developing and where you're responding to news that are happening quickly, they cannot deny you a permit just because you didn't have enough time to request one in advance. And in many circumstances, they can just waive the permit requirement altogether. So that's your fundamental right to protest. Now, before I go into the right to record the police, I'm going to play a second video that actually covers a little bit, and this is an important topic, about how do you protect your own privacy at a protest, particularly when you are concerned that the police might be targeting multiple people in the protest or they might be surveilling them. So with that said, here's the video.
I'm at the Black Lives Matter protest on June 1st, 2020. We're here in honor of George Floyd and against the police brutality that caused his senseless death. When you come to a protest like this, it makes sense to bring a camera with you, to bring a phone with you, to make sure you can record it, you can get the message out. The message is super important. But those same phones, those same cameras can cause problems if the data gets into the hands of people who you're against. And that includes the police, like these guys over here. So make sure when you come to a protest, make sure that you've got a few things covered. Make sure you've encrypted your device. Make sure that your device has a strong password. The strong password means not just 4 digits, it means the entire thing. 6 digits, a full textual password if you need to do that. The stronger the password, the harder it is for somebody to guess and get into your phone. Make sure that your phone is in airplane mode when you don't need to communicate. That reduces the amount of signals that come off the phone. The radio signals can be used to keep track of your device and keep track of where you are. The police use those radio signals to keep track of protesters, and they could use them against you in the future, so you want to make sure you don't do that. Sometimes you need to communicate, turn it on, but when you don't need it on, you can turn it off. You have a right to record the police. Make sure you record the police if they're doing something wrong. You absolutely have that right, and it's important. It's one of the checks that we have against police brutality and against police abuse. The facial recognition systems can keep track of who you are, and we don't know how the police will use those pictures in the future. If you have a mask, your face is hidden, you're going to be in a better position from that. If the cops do take you, make sure your phone is off. If you can turn it off as they take you, that's good. If you can just make sure that it's locked, don't leave it so that it can be unlocked with your thumbprint. Don't leave it so it can be unlocked with your face. Those are things that the police can use to unlock your phone for you. And if they unlock your phone, it reveals lots of information that's in there about you and information that's about your friends and the people that you care about. You don't want to turn that information over. So make sure that it needs to be unlocked with a password. If they do catch you, some of the cops may decide to offer you a drink, a soda, a water, a juice, or they might offer you a cigarette. Don't take it. Cops have been known to use those tricks as ways to gather your DNA. They can gather your DNA, they can then use that information later on. It puts your DNA into a database, and that's a whole separate set of problems. Those databases are biased against people of color. Those databases are used to over-police the same communities that are downtrodden by the police every day. So get out here, exercise your right to protest, stay as safe as you can, speak truth to power, tell people what matters. Black Lives Matter. I'm at the Black Lives Matter protest on June 1st, 2020. We're here.
I apologize. 1 second. I don't know why it's not moving forward
And against
in the presentation. Oh. Let me try relaunching the presentation. It looks like there is some sort of technical difficulty. Oh, here. Okay, here we are. Again, I apologize. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the right to record the police. And this is a very important right. It is part of your First Amendment right. And it's obviously, it has shown police abuse all over the country. Is the reason we know about George Floyd's killing, is the reason why we can see and respond to the horrible acts of brutality by law enforcement officers everywhere in the US, including how they have responded often very poorly to demonstrations and protests everywhere in the country. So it is important that you understand this right. The first thing that you need to know is that when you're lawfully present in a place, meaning when you're not breaking any laws and you can be in that public space, like a park, like a street, sidewalk, you have the right to photograph and record anything in plain view. And that includes police officers doing whatever they're doing at that point, whether it's arresting people or whether citing people or talking to people, you can record the police. The police must have a warrant before they take or search your camera or your cell phone. They cannot just take it from you or from your hand or tell you to stop filming or recording. They can also not, if they do take your camera for any reason or your cell phone, they cannot delete videos or photos from your cell phone or camera. That's illegal. And finally, the police can order people to cease and desist activities that interfere with law enforcement. Essentially, they can ask you to keep a safe distance, but so long as you're keeping a safe distance, you can record them from that safe distance. And so I want to, before moving to the next slide, I want to talk a little bit about tips for recording the police and holding them accountable during a demonstration. The first thing is that you want to document important events during a protest. And that means you want to document, you don't have to have your camera on all the time. You don't have to take out your phone all the time. In fact, as you just heard, we don't recommend that. If you don't need to use your phone, you want to have it on airplane mode, you want to have it perhaps turned off. But if you want to document what's going on, try to document important events. Things like arrests, the use of force by the police, displays of force, intimidation tactics that they might be using, tools that they may be using. For example, if they show up with a sound cannon or something that might be harmful to the protesters. Also, if they start issuing orders to disperse, if they tell people just to get out of a specific place, you might want to record that. And finally, if any orders or any communications that the police have with the public, with the general public, you might want to record those. Those are often very useful later as you are, if you want to fight against police abuse or against unjustified arrests. When you record the police, you want to use a wide angle. You often don't want to get up close, not only because you might be asked to step away, but also because it's often the case that it's better if you have multiple perspectives from wide angles as opposed to a very close, close shot that doesn't really reveal the context, doesn't tell you as much about the situation. Finally, you might want to ask for names of witnesses. You might want to ask for names of other people recording things. That way you can coordinate and you can then provide that information to, to us or to the group doing the protest or the demonstration or the person arrested. Finally, you might want to be a little bit careful when you record law enforcement that you're not also recording your fellow demonstrators, your fellow protesters, because again, the police might use those videos later against them in court. So you want to focus on what they're doing, what the police are doing, and record police actions. If you end up recording other people, you might want to actually, potentially blur faces of attendees, because again, the point is to hold police accountable. Now I'm going to talk about what to do if you are stopped first and then eventually arrested. And the first thing is that, if you're stopped, that doesn't necessarily mean you're arrested. So you should stay calm. You shouldn't resist. You shouldn't, argue. And most importantly, do not consent to any searches of you or your belongings. Because again, if you do that, you might waive your rights. So never consent to any searches. Ask if you can leave. If a cop wants to say, I want to talk to you with us for a second, or I have a question to ask you, or something like that, you can say, am I free to leave? And if so, calmly walk away. You don't have to tell them anything. You don't have to share any information with them. You have the right to remain silent. If you are under arrest because the police officer tells you so, ask for an attorney. Do not sign anything. Do not say anything before you talk to an attorney. Do not answer any questions, including the names of other people in the protest or other people that were with you. Police may sometimes pat you down if they suspect you have a weapon, and they will search you if you are arrested, and they will likely take your phone, which is one reason you need to have a good password on your phone, and why you want to take precautions to not have anything in your possession that might get you in trouble. Because again, if you are arrested, they will search you, and anything that you have on yourself will be used as evidence later on. Pay attention to the arresting officer's name and agency. And here in Hawaii, most likely, it will be the county police responding to the demonstrations. Here in Honolulu, it would be the HPD, Honolulu Police Department, but in each different island, it will be the county's police department. However, we also know that at least in the continent, you have other agencies responding to demonstrations. You sometimes have the National Guard. Sometimes you might even have ICE, Immigrations and Customs Enforcement in some of the protests. So you might want to pay attention of what are the agencies that are responding to the demonstrations. We don't expect that in Hawaii, but let us know if you see anyone else, any other agency responding other than the county police. And then you just heard, put a real password on your phone. It's not enough to have use your thumb. It's not enough to use your face as a password. It's better that you have a real password on your phone. And the reason is that it receives the most legal protection. And it's what essentially ensures that the police have to get a warrant before they're able to search your phone. So finally, I want to touch on what to do if you believe your rights have been violated. And this is a tricky topic because I just told you about your rights, but that doesn't mean that your rights are not going to be violated. That doesn't mean that the police always follow the Constitution. That's the reason why the ACLU and many organizations are pushing back and why we file lawsuits. It's because the police don't respect these rights. I don't want to say all the time, but often they don't respect people's rights. So the first thing you want to remember is that right then and there, even if you're angry, that's probably not the best time to try to get the police to change ways or tactics. I'm not saying you don't engage with the police in a respectful way. However, remember that anything you say can be used against you. So it might be better that you just shut up and just start taking mental note, and then later on you write everything down you remember, including again the officer's badge, patrol car number, and get the agency they work for. Because essentially many of the things you can do about violations of your rights have to be done, unfortunately, after the fact. Get contact information from witnesses, and that includes, if you have people who were recording things, you might want to get their recordings, and you might want to get their names and the names of other witnesses who can corroborate, what happened to you. Take any photographs take photographs and document injuries that you received from the police or that you received as a result of police activity. And with all of this information at hand, then you can file a written complaint with the police commission or the professional standards board within the police department. I'm not claiming those are panaceas. These get filed all the time and don't result in anything, or they result in a slap in the wrist. However, these are very important tools to hold the police accountable because they create a record. And the only way we're going to reform police in Hawaii and nationwide is if we send these complaints, we show that the system isn't working, we show that the police cannot be held accountable. And to do that, you have to submit these complaints. It is often the case that you have a very short period of time to submit them, by the way. So you want to get on that very quickly. And finally, consult with an attorney, and you might want to, also reach out to your local ACLU here in Hawaii. That's of course us, and let us know what happened. And we can provide help. We submit these complaints on behalf of people all the time, and we try to assist. It doesn't necessarily mean we can file a case for you because we're a small affiliate, but we might be able to work with your attorney. So with that all out of the way, I'm going to play a video about, why is it so hard here in Hawaii, but also nationwide, to hold the police accountable.
So there are multiple reasons why it is really hard to hold police accountable. One of them is a doctrine called qualified immunity, which allows police officers to escape liability when they violated the Constitution if a reasonable officer in the circumstances might have thought that what they were doing was legal. So this means every time there's any sort of legal uncertainty, the police officer wins, even if what they did was actually a violation of the Constitution. It also means that officers are able to get the benefit of lack of clarity in decisions, so that, if a case that already addressed similar circumstances wasn't quite close enough, the officer escapes liability. Another reason why it's really hard to hold police officers accountable are police union contracts, which make it very difficult to fire officers, to discipline officers, and in many states, for example, like here in New York, there's a statute called 50A that makes it next to impossible for members of the public to get access to police disciplinary records. Today, Black and brown people are still more likely to be stopped, arrested, cited by police than their white counterparts. If you look at marijuana arrests, for example, a Black person is 3.6 times as likely to be arrested for a marijuana offense as a white person, even though the use of marijuana is about the same across races. And all of this goes back to who is police and where. Black and brown communities face the brunt of policing, whereas wealthy white communities are able to go through everyday life without ever having to worry about being hassled by police or being seriously injured or killed. What we need to do in order to reimagine policing in this country is to shift resources away from police enforcing relatively non-serious low-level offenses, make it so that police are not constantly harassing people who are trying to go about their everyday lives, and reduce the budgets of police departments, keep that money, and reinvest it in other more positive services that can protect the health, safety, and welfare of people like Black and brown people.
So to tell you more about what you can do here, how you can get involved here in Hawaii, I'm going to pass the microphone back to Shayna. And the right to protest is so important, but so is the right to, ask for changes to the law, to changes in policy, and following through with demands. And so, it begins with a protest, but it has to end with changes in the policies and the law so that we can hold police accountable everywhere. So, Shayna.
Thank you, Mateo. Again, my name is Shayna, and I'm the Smart Justice Organizer at ACLU Hawaii. Our campaign is part of a national initiative to decarcerate the nation and Hawaii by 50% while challenging the racial disparities in the criminal legal system. That means we recognize far too many people in the US, namely Black, Brown, and Indigenous people. And in Hawaii, this means Kanaka Maoli and Pacifica peoples are disproportionately policed, arrested, and incarcerated. We seek to empower people who have been directly impacted and allies with the tools and resources to change the system, not only in the courtroom, but at our state legislature and in our communities. You can join this fight and become a smart justice leader by writing a letter to the editor on the importance of ending mass incarceration in our community. You can contact your state lawmakers, share why ending driver's license stoppers, which are often traffic fines or tickets that people can't afford to pay and then can't find a way to work. You can talk to them about why that's important to stop that. You can talk to them about ending the barriers to employment for people who have a record and why all this matters. And lastly, you can contact me at 808-681-2709 or at slalexander@acluhawaii.org. We'll be sending a follow-up email with this webinar with videos and resources and our contact information. And again, please type in any questions that you have into our Q&A box. Thank you.
And before we go into Q&A, I just wanted to say there are a few resources right now on your screen. Please free to check them out. We will put the presentation on our website so that you have this as a resource and you have these resources. And again, thank you for attending the presentation. I'm having trouble opening the Q&A. 1 second. Again, I apologize. There.
I can read it to you. There you go.
No, I got it. I got it. I apologize. So the first question, and please do ask questions. We have like half an hour at least for questions. In a protest, if some protesters violate the law, does that mean the police can harass any protester? And the answer is no. The police officers should and try to discriminate between people violating the law and people who are peacefully protesting. And they shouldn't use tools or ways of enforcement that go beyond what is necessary to address that specific situation. Of course, there might be very bad situations that might require the police officers to request that people get out of a specific area. And if people, you should comply with those orders. Otherwise, you could face arrest. But otherwise, the tools used by the police have to be commensurate and proportionate to whatever is going on at the time. And if it's just a few people breaking the law, the police do have, of course, the responsibility to potentially arrest those people, but that doesn't mean necessarily that they can target everyone indiscriminately, how we have seen in many parts of the continent. So the second question, let me see, it's what is defined as a safe distance away to record? And so for that question, it's a little bit of facts and circumstances specific. Use a little bit of your judgment and again, try to listen to the police. For the most part, I would say, if you are 12 feet, 15 feet away from the police and there's nothing else going on, they're just, let's say, making an announcement, or they are just making what looks like a very peaceful arrest. There shouldn't be any reason why the police ask you to be farther apart. You can always ask them questions. If they tell you, like, get out of here, or you're too close to me, you can say, officer, where can I stand to record what you're doing, or what is a safe distance? You can always push back too if you feel that's wrong. However, it's a little bit of a facts and circumstances type of question, which depends on what's going on. It's not the same if an entire situation turns violent And then again, the police might ask you to just get out of that area, versus if things are going well and there are just very specific incidents of violence, in which case, you might want to just step far away enough that you're not interfering in any way with what the police are doing. The next question is, there has been reports of some organizers here in Honolulu who are not getting permits. How does that affect the protest itself, if that's true? So, this is a complicated question, in part because of COVID-19. Because one of the reasons we understand some places are denying permits are saying, there shouldn't be public gatherings larger of 10 people or larger than, whatever limit each county or each jurisdiction sets. And as I said, there is a pandemic going on, and this is another facts-intensive question of like each jurisdiction, what those limits should be. What I can say is, again, that police and the government should be treating protests alike. And we have seen a number of protests around the country against some of the measures to fight the pandemic. That has not resulted in mass arrest, that has not resulted in, and so I don't expect that the police will necessarily use the lack of permit against you. However, it's something that, in general, if you're in the streets, if you're on public sidewalks, and if there was not sufficient time to get a permit, because again, we are right now responding to what is really a developing situation everywhere, then they cannot insist on a permit to deny you your right to protest. If you're going to end up, let's say, in a park, and you're going to, there might be too many people in that park, they might have a better argument for requiring you a permit, but in general, streets and sidewalks are safe places for people to spontaneously gather and protest, even without a permit. The next question is, how do we apply for permits, and how do we go about showing the police or permits at the site of the protest? That's a very good question, and it really depends on where you're protesting. And we have in our website, in fact, in that resource page I shared at the end, a really excellent resource we have developed over time for Hawaii called the First Amendment Toolkit. In that toolkit, it will tell you different places where you can get permits and where you don't need permits. For example, we filed a lawsuit and you do not need a permit for the Capitol. However, there might be certain government property where you want to obtain a permit in advance, and so you should apply. One of the things you should do once you get a permit is, you should have people who are organizing the protest have that permit with them, show it to any officers that are assigned to the demonstration, say, we're here with a permit, and then again, if anything arises, you can develop, that initial point of contact with the police officer, so that they know who to go to if you're the organizer, and talk to you in case any concerns arise. But once you have a permit, you should be relatively safe in terms of the police trying to shut down your protest, unless, again, violence ensues or something major happens. The next question is, how does a protest operate in the street and not impede traffic and to stay within the law? That's a very good question. And so, in general, you should not block traffic, as I said earlier. Not every protest happens in the middle of a city. Protests can happen in places that also don't have a lot of traffic, in which case, again, if you're in the middle of the street protesting and there's no traffic, you're not blocking traffic, and that should be generally okay. That being said, you should try to follow traffic signals, and you should, if you plan to block the street, if you plan to march through a street, kind of like you do during a parade, you should try to obtain a permit. Again, one of the safer places is the sidewalk, and in general, you can go through streets, cross streets. If you're going, let's say, for example, from Ala Moana Park to the Capitol, you can go through the sidewalks, you can cross streets. That should be okay. You don't need a permit for that. If you're going to block streets, you probably should get a permit. And of course, if you're in an empty street, you probably have additional rights because you're not ultimately blocking traffic. Monica, it says you're talking, but I cannot hear you, FYI.
I just muted myself. I think that there are no more questions.
Any final questions, anything else? Otherwise, I'm happy to again, I want to thank everyone who attended. Oh, one more question. Are we allowed to resist arrest if the police refuse to tell us why we're being arrested? You know, again, great question. The answer is no. You should not resist arrest, even when the police are acting in a bad way. In fact, especially if they're acting in an unconstitutional or if they're abusing their power, because that will be used against you and it will be used to justify whatever actions they're taking at that moment. And you sometimes are not just putting yourself at risk, you might be putting other protesters at risk if you resist arrest, because again, they will say they turn violent or something like that. So our recommendation is do not resist arrest. You know, in general, you don't have to answer questions. You might want to give them just your name, because otherwise, if you don't give them your name, they might actually take you to the station for booking. Whereas if you just give them your name, they might be willing to just give you a citation. And the citation will tell you why you're being arrested. The police should tell you what you're being arrested for, so you should ask, why am I being arrested? If they don't tell you, just make mental notes of that. And again, don't resist, don't argue. Remember that anything you say is going to be used against you. Anything you do is going to be used against you. And yes, don't resist. Another question, are there any resources for people to read about police protocols and police tactics? And so that, you know, there is a lot of resources, and this is a big conversation. And the police department, each police department actually publishes their policies online. So you could go to their websites and look at some of their policies. Some are better than others. Unfortunately, here in Hawaii, each police chief pretty much has unbridled power to set what those policies are and to enforce them however, you know, they deem appropriate. We don't have a right to comment. We don't have a right to notice. You know, all these policies and procedures are internal and often adopted without public input. We should change that. However, you know, you can look into that. We also sent a letter last year in response to the demonstrations on Mauna Kea that essentially tells the police how they should respond to mass protests. So if you go to our website, it's there. And that letter really compiles a lot of the police reform work that has been done in the past, you know, 10 years about what the police should be doing, how should the police be acting if they want to act in a responsible way, if they want to de-escalate when they're responding to a mass protests. As I say, this is an evolving conversation, and as you know, what we have seen in the continent is just you know, completely unacceptable. And so I'm sure more tools will develop, more resources will be out there about, you know, what should be the role of the police during a protest, which in our opinion, and as you heard earlier, is to protect the right to protest, is to protect your First Amendment right. And now a bunch more questions. Do you know of groups that are organizing around protests here in Honolulu that are offering legal representation and or bail funds? I'm aware of the Hawaii Bail Fund, and I know they have fundraised and they have been active for a while, and they have in fact bailed out people. during past protests. I'm not sure if they're planning to do that again, but we have been in touch with them in the past, so I'm happy to ask them that question. In terms of legal representation, unfortunately, most likely you will be represented by a public. Not unfortunately, I just your options are limited when it comes to legal representation here in Hawaii. At least criminal defense, if you are arrested. Most likely it will be a public defender who represents you in criminal court. We at the ACLU do not generally help on criminal defense matters. I'm not a criminal defense attorney, but that's one option. The other thing is if you have been injured or if your rights were violated, again, you can get in touch with us. We can see if we can help you and represent you. If not, perhaps we can connect you with attorneys who might be able to do that. But there are there are not that many groups in Hawaii offering legal representation outside of, private attorneys and the public defenders. Are there any specific asks, policy demands around policing that the ACLU of Hawaii is urging during this time that local advocates can be supporting? We are developing those resources as we speak. We have some already. We are, we submitted testimony recently on the budget that was recently passed third reading here in the city and county of Honolulu. So if you go, I don't remember the bill number, but we can find out. And again, Shayna is going to share some of those resources in her email. But we will be following through with other actions you can take. We will be looking again at how we fund the police, what is the responsibility of the police here in Hawaii, how we can, increase transparency, increasing accountability, strengthened our police commissions, which unfortunately they don't have that many tools to hold police accountable. And ultimately, how can we make sure that the police are ultimately accountable to the people and not the other way around? But more on that is coming. Is it okay if you can provide a link to the said police reform letter in the follow-up email, please? Yes, we are happy to send the link to the police reform letter. And we can also attach the letter we sent on Mauna Kea, which will tell you a lot about, how the police should be responding during these times. And we are happy to share more resources. I'll talk to Shayna about it. And then finally, if writing, who are the key players or who are the key audiences that we suggest you write to in regards to issues about police reform, social injustice, racism, etc. And I will say, it's pretty much everyone. I mean, this is a situation where there are actions you can take at the most local level, meaning city and county, but there are actions you can take at the legislature, and there are actions that you can take at the congressional federal level. And the request will be different. And again, we will provide some of those resources. But this is an issue that, it's everyone's responsibility. It's a historic injustice, and we have let it fester. And reforms that have passed have clearly not been sufficient to address what's going on. And so it will really take a very sustained effort to change things. Right now we're activated, we are angry, we want things to change, but that's not enough. We need that energy when the policies are being passed through city council, when at the ballot box, or when we organize and want to, for example, reform police here in Hawaii, that might require some sort of charter amendment. Things like that. Those are the moments where people need to be active and showing up and making calls and ensuring that we change this forever, because otherwise it's not going to happen. anything else? I think we still have 10 minutes, so I'm happy to continue answering questions. Or Shayna, Monica, if you want to add anything before kind of closing things off.
Yeah, definitely. I know folks are really hungry for resources around reform and how we can, like who to contact. So definitely you can follow up with me around getting involved with our Smart Justice campaign. And there are a lot of conversations happening right now because of BLM, and really excited with all of the momentum. I would first start off with like finding out who your state representative and senator are, and building a relationship with them. Where do they stand on these issues? Where do they stand on police reform, on a lot of the reforms that BLM and ACLU, or maybe you even have an idea of how Hawaii police should be behaving. And also just a reminder to stay safe out there. You know, we are in a pandemic, so do everything you can, wear masks, social distance. Yeah, and I think that's all that I really have.
Well, thanks to everyone. Thanks, Shayna. Thanks, Monica, and everyone who helped organize, and thanks to those who attended. I hope to see you at the protest and at the demonstrations, and I hope to see you later at the Capitol and at the City Council meetings, and then at the ballot box. You know, again, thank you.